Okay, so I just completed the ideation process and it took a while, but I think something actually really good came out of it. Going in, I was a little bit weary because this is kind of a complex issue to break down, especially it being all about people's emotions. And we're talking about death here. It's a pretty morbid subject, so trying to figure out how to reduce cost without making people completely uncomfortable. And it ended up actually working out really well. There was a really good option that I came up with that I think could actually realistically work. So this is a different arrangement of all the post-it notes in the videos I'll put on. You'll see that they were kind of put out in a different manner, but this kind of makes more sense. So the first post that I started out with was reducing the amount for palliative care while making people comfortable, which is a pretty daunting task. So off of that, I made up 8 different suggestions. 7 of these up here in the dark blue were decent but not great. And then this 8th one I had was really good. So I had my roommate come in and talk to me about which idea he thought was really good, and we both agreed that this idea right here in the dark blue was a really good idea to expand on. So I kind of came up with this term, not going to really stick to it because it kind of has a negative connotation, but it's called pre-wills. Basically, it's a doctor and a patient before the patient undergoes a ton of operations, coming up with a list of conditions upon which the patient is comfortable saying, okay, enough is enough. And I'll kind of go into what that means more in these post-it notes. So we expanded on that, or I expanded on that with the light blue post-it notes. So some of those ideas would be, having different parameters or conditions before the doctors decide to call it. So whether that's the amount of brain stem cell activity or something more specific to the operation being performed on the patient. So if there's, something specific about a certain type of operation, maybe it's some type of lung cancer or whatever the specifics are, going over that with the doctor and figuring out, okay, what would be really bad in this scenario that is hard to recover from, and let's acknowledge it and then outline it to say, if we get to this point, we're just going to have to call it. Another idea would be setting a max amount of money spent on the operation. So, that was one that ended up actually being kind of a good idea. That was this one down here, and I expanded on that a little bit. And actually, before I touch on that, I'll go over the rest of what the pre-will is. So the pre-will would be a one-on-one discussion with the patient and doctor. It omits the family and the friends from the discussion and makes them more comfortable, and it makes the patient more comfortable that they're now back in control of what happens with their life. Because before, they could be put in a coma, and then you have doctors, friends, and family all arguing over what should happen. Instead, you're now putting the decisions back into the person's whose life you're talking about, person's hands whose life you're talking about. You kind of get what I'm saying, where it's the person's whose life it is now once again deciding what happens. So it's confidential, and at every point in the stage of the operation, the patient and the doctor can readjust or reevaluate the pre-will, readjust the conditions, figuring out, are we on the right trajectory? Has anything changed? So we can modify or just get rid of the pre-will altogether. Because maybe after one operation, everything goes great, and you say, I don't really need this anymore. Or things go awry and you say, okay, what are the new conditions? Let's reevaluate. And then you keep doing that until the patient either comes out or gets into a mental state where they are no longer capable of deciding for themselves what happens, in which case you just follow the pre-will. Because that's what it's for. It's supposed to be a safety net for when the patient is no longer cognitively aware of what's going on. Another idea is that doctors could have templates and databases of different previous pre-wills from similar operations or similar conditions, similar patient conditions, to present in the meeting between the patient and the doctor to reduce time. And for efficiency purposes, if you have other patients who made it and it ended up working out really well, then you can say, this is what worked well, this is what didn't, or basically just having a template already ready. No one really likes to talk about their own death. It's emotional. So just making the process as quick as possible. We know people are comfortable with discussing death because, you know, there are such things as wills that people will discuss, but no one really likes to mull on it. So making the discussions as quick as possible but efficient would be vital. So that could be an option, helping with the efficiency, having databases. So back again to the dollar amount spent, or a max amount of dollars spent. I came up with some ideas on what that could look like. So you could have healthcare providers talk about how much the typical operation, this specific operation would cost for a patient. So it gives the patient an idea of how much money to say they're willing to spend, or how much they're willing to set aside, or say how much is too much. You could actually have options for the patient to set aside money in case the limit is passed. So the patient could say, okay, for my personal funds, I'll just throw in an extra $5,000 in case there's an operation that could happen but won't because I didn't sign up for enough money. You could have a range instead of a set dollar amount because, again, you know, if there's an operation that's $1 million and you only set down 900,000 or, you know, 975,000, making it a range instead of a specific number would really help with that fluctuation. Again, reevaluating after every operation to see if the dollar amount stays the same. You could have a database full of amounts spent on previous operations to give an understanding to the patient and the doctors that's separate from the healthcare providers saying what they found. Then you could also have full transparency on behalf of the doctors to talk about every option and how much it's going to cost. And then what should be said about all of this is, once again, these are conditions. Nothing here is saying what should and shouldn't be done. And that, again, is why I left so much room for reevaluation, because before the operation, you're not going to know exactly what happens. So you can do your best to predict what happens with multiple versions of the pre-will. You know, here's all the different routes of operations that could occur depending on what happens. So we'll follow each action plan depending on what happens and then update it with the reevaluations. But these are all conditions, you know, whatever comes first. So if you guys, or if a patient, you know, sets aside, says $2 million you spent on me in 90 days, and if we pass that and I don't, and nothing happens, forget about it. In which case, they reached 2 million, and then the patient said that they were comfortable saying that's it. Or, you know, it could be a multitude of things. So it could also be stem cell activity, saying here's the threshold. If I cross anywhere underneath it, I'm most likely not coming out of the coma. I'm fine with it. So these are all conditions. This is in no way stating dictating what should and shouldn't happen. Instead, it should actually allow for flexibility so that patients can still receive the top treatment, but still take the burden off of their families and friends when it comes to what happens to them. So that's my grand idea. I'll be presenting a prototype on the site as well, but for the most part, I thought I'd give it an in-depth explanation because it's a hard concept to kind of grasp. So, thank you.